Okay, so I'm going to be soldering on my bullet connectors. First I got to get them prepared. I'm using Castle 4mm. The new motor came with 3.5mm. I'm just upgrading it to a little bit thicker connector that will accept 100 amps. I'm using a butane soldering kit. The idea is to fill the capsule about 3/4 of the way. So if you look at the capsule there, we're going to fill that 3/4 of the way with solder. Make sure you don't do the other end, which is the side that's going to accept the male portion. So we're just going to heat the bullet connector and then start feeding the solder. Down in there it goes, already starting to flow. So I've already prepared the other ones. This is what it'll look like. You can kind of see that it's about 3/4 of the way filled up with solder. The wires will be tinned and then go inside of this and be reheated, which I'll show you in a minute. We'll just have to let that cool. Okay, so now we're going to start soldering the motor wires onto the male connector of the bullet. It's been filled with 3/4 of an inch of solder. I'm going to heat it up, slide my wire in, hold it there for a few seconds. I'm just going to kind of reheat it a little bit with it being inverted. Okay, so there's one. I'll move on to the next ones, and then hopefully we can reconnect the motor and make sure everything's working properly. I still need to put heat shrink on that. I'll show you that in a minute. And I'm actually going to be using some very durable, heat-resistant sleeves to go over the top of the cabling. Okay, I'm going to solder one of the wires coming off the circuit board, the motor wires, to the female portion of the bullet connector, and I'm just going to heat it up. It's already been filled with about 3/4 of solder. Slide it down in, heat it up really good, hold it still until it's solidified. And to make doubly sure, I'm going to invert it a little bit and heat it up again, just to make sure I don't have a cold solder connection. Okay, so we've finished soldering the bullet connectors, female portion, to the circuit board, control board wires, and then the male portion, they've been soldered to the actual motor wires. Once we slip these in, it's a pretty good solid connection, but I'm going to be heat shrinking the ends and then also putting a heat shrink over the entire wire so they can't become disconnected. Okay, so I put heat sleeve on the female portion of the bullet connector, and what I want to do is I want to just bring it up just enough so this end of the connector will fit solidly into the male portion. So I'm just going to kind of slide that up there like that, and then I'm going to heat it so it's just the right depth. So it still can be disassembled, but has a very good solid connection and completely insulated. But there'll be one more layer of shrink wrap that's going to go over the entire piece to lock it together. If I ever have to remove this cable, all I have to do is just remove that outer shrink wrap. Okay, all three are shrink wrapped, bullet connectors put together. So now I'm going to be putting one more sleeve of shrink wrap over the top so they don't come apart. Not really sure it's necessary, but I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, so we have our motor wires that are all set to go. We've got our main board wires, and I'm going to be putting, even though we got heat shrink at the end of our bullet connectors, I'm also going to be putting heat shrink over both connectors so they can't pull apart. I'm going to make sure we got blue, and we have blue, so we join them together, make sure they're in good and solid, slide our heat shrink over the top, making sure it's in the center properly. Okay, I'm just going to heat it. Always keep it moving so you don't fry the wire. Okay, so that one's done. I'll proceed to do the other ones. Okay, so all three of the motor wires are now connected to the main board with kind of double shrink wrap. Outer layer is going to prevent the bullet connectors from coming apart. There's another shrink wrap underneath going over the top of the wires. Now I've added this sleeve. I'm not sure that it's going to go over the top, so let's just see if it does. And it's not going to, so that's okay. I'm confident of that. This sleeve can be used just to kind of keep the wires together, so there's no fraying or anything. So I'm not worried about that connection at all. So I ran into a little problem with my cabling of my hall sensor wires. It needs to, I don't know if you can see it, it needs to go into that socket there. And when you lay things out, the hall sensor wires, the connector's not going to be able to make it. It's not long enough. Especially when I lay out the cables the way they're supposed to be, so they're nice and neat. So I've got from the other motor, I've got the connector, and my thought is to attach that there, and if we lay everything out, I think if I just cut this connector off and attach these wires together and use some shrink wrap, and it'll be just the right length. So that way I won't have a double splice if I cut this, add a wire in between, add the connector to it. Then I don't like the looks of that. So thank God I got another connector as a spare. Don't know why they cut it too short.